And welcome back, everybody. So this is your first sample question on the topic we've been discussing. So this question here is going to really test your knowledge on spouses, common law partners, and conjugal partners, and the differences between the three as it might pertain to your upcoming ICCRC Full Skills Exam. All right, so in this question we have Vladimir and Sonia. So Vladimir and Sonia have been in a long-distance relationship for the past 3 years, ever since Vladimir moved to Ottawa to work for Senators Incorporated, a technology firm. 1 year after arriving in Ottawa, Vladimir applied for and received permanent resident status as a member of the Canadian Experience class. During this time, he went back to his country of the Dominican Republic once a year for his 1 month of holidays and always stayed with Sonia during this time. Both Sonia and Vladimir are committed to their relationship and hope that Sonia can immigrate to Canada next year after she graduates from her nursing certificate in order for the couple to live together in Ottawa. In order to begin the process, they search the ICCRC list of RCICs located in the Dominican Republic and booked an appointment with Walter, an RCIC, to discuss their options. What is Walter likely to suggest? Now we have A, Vladimir can sponsor Sonia as a conjugal partner. B, Vladimir can sponsor Sonia as a common law partner. Vladimir can sponsor Sonia as a spouse if they get married was C. And finally, D, Vladimir can sponsor Sonia as a fiancé if they plan to get married. All right, so this question deals with pretty much all those little elements we talked about in the previous video. So press pause right now and try to work your way through it, because hopefully you can get the correct answer. So if you press pause and maybe you reread that question, some of these important pieces of information should start to jump out at you. So we have their relationships, the type of relationship that they have, and the amount of time as well. We have a little bit about Vladimir's history and his status in Canada, and then they give us some information, some further information about their relationship, really. So how often they see each other, in what context as well, and finally their intent for the future. So all of these elements play a role in helping us choose the correct answer here. Now going back to the question as a whole, you can see that when we look at these answers, we have a few options, but essentially what each answer says is that yes, Vladimir can sponsor Sonia. So we know that Vladimir can sponsor Sonia, but now we have to look a little bit deeper and ask the question really of how he can sponsor her. Is it as a conjugal partner, common law partner? Is it as a spouse or as a fiancé? Now, when we take a look at D, we can see that the question says, or the potential answer says, that Vladimir can sponsor Sonia as a fiancé if they plan to get married. So what we're looking at here then are some situations relating to a fiancé. Can a fiancé be sponsored? And we talked about this in the previous lesson, but let's go over this again, because now we can see this in the context of a question. So in a situation where a couple is engaged to be married, the sponsor cannot sponsor the other person as a conjugal partner. Of course, in this case here, as we saw in the previous lesson, they'd have to wait until they're actually married, or if they live together in a common law relationship for at least 12 months. So in this case here, we know that D is incorrect because there aren't really any fiancé programs for immigration. That's great. So now we're left with 3 options here. Now we have the conjugal partner, common law partner, and spouse if they get married. So let's take a look at the next one here. So we took a look at one element of conjugal partners, and that is, of course, with fiancés and whether or not fiancés can be sponsored. The answer was no, of course. If someone is engaged to be married and they don't qualify as a spouse or common law partner, then they would have to either get married or live together in order to qualify for immigration. So let's explore a couple of different aspects of conjugal partner sponsorship through this scenario of Vladimir and Sonia. So with Vladimir, we could see that when we're looking at their relationship, we could see that he went back to the Dominican Republic once a year for a month, and he always stayed with Sonia during that time. So they've been in a long-distance relationship for 3 years, and we can see their intent as well, and that is, of course, that Sonia wants to immigrate after she graduates with her nursing certificate. So we're going to explore conjugal partners in detail over here, just because this is the first time you're seeing this through the scope of a question, and by having a really great background and analysis in conjugal partners and who can be sponsored, who cannot be sponsored as a conjugal partner, it's going to help you to really close that gap in knowing the difference essentially between conjugal partner, a common law partner, and a spouse. So remember that a conjugal partner is a pretty specific situation in immigration. So it's where people are basically separated because of circumstances beyond their control. So that could be an immigration barrier. Maybe somebody couldn't, or both parties really couldn't get a visitor's visa or something like that. Maybe someone's married to somebody else already and it's illegal to divorce the person even though they can prove that the relationship has been out of status for a long time, for over a year. Maybe same-sex and that type of relationship is illegal in the other country. All of these, of course, don't really relate to the situation we're looking at with Vladimir and Sonia, because in terms of an immigration barrier, Sonia probably wouldn't qualify for immigration to Canada as under an economic program, but they can't really prove that she can't come as a visitor. And of course, Vladimir could always go back to Dominican Republic, right? Okay, there's no mention of them being married to other people and that kind of thing, or being in a same-sex relationship, or their current relationship being illegal in their country. Remember as well with the conjugal partner, they have to prove that they can't live together. All right, so there's no mention in what we looked at with Vladimir and Sonia in either of them being refused visas or anything like that, or any type of illegality or a harsh penalty for their relationship, or a war or something like that keeping them apart. And finally, this first one here, I think might qualify as describing their relationship. So they could have lived together, but they chose not to. And with the example that we saw in the lesson, we saw that if one person chooses to not leave his or her school or job, or they're just not ready to live together, that doesn't qualify someone as a conjugal partner. And you can see with Sonia, it seems that she wants to stay in school and then maybe immigrate afterwards. Okay, and of course they can't prove that there is not a reason beyond their control for them not being together. We saw the fiancé aspect of this question before, where a fiance would either, in their case anyways, they'd have to either get married or live in a common law relationship in order to immigrate. Okay, so now that we have a really great analysis, and now that you have a really great knowledge of conjugal partner sponsorship, we can be very confident in knowing that both A and D are certainly incorrect. So now we're looking at basically the difference between B and C. Okay, so let's take a look and see if Vladimir can sponsor Sonia as a common law partner. So we have all of his information here, all the information from the scenario. Now let's explore this one together. So as we saw before, with common law partners, it's not a boyfriend-girlfriend visa. With a common law partner, it has to be basically a marriage without the marriage. So it has to be a common law relationship. They have to have lived together. The one partner certainly can leave to go to work or something like that on short trips. But in the case of Vladimir and Sonia, as we saw, Vladimir lives in Canada, really, and visits Dominican Republic for a month every year. If it were the opposite, let's say that both Vladimir and Sonia lived in Canada together, and Vladimir had to leave Canada maybe for a month in total for the whole year to go work in some other countries, then they still might qualify as common law partners. But in this case here, they're in a long-distance relationship. They're probably boyfriend-girlfriend, really. And even though they intend to get married later on, currently they don't qualify as common law because they currently are not in a marriage-like relationship, and they haven't been in that relationship either. Another way to clarify this is to look at the proof needed in a common law relationship. So obviously they don't live together. They wouldn't have shared residential leases, shared bills, and mail going to the same house and that kind of thing. So obviously they're not in a common law relationship. Alright, so now we are only left with C. So let's take a look at C, and that way we'll know for sure with 100% certainty if C is the correct answer for us. Okay, so when we look at Vladimir and the scenario, we can see again Vladimir's a permanent resident. He goes to Dominican Republic for about a month a year. They've been in that long-distance relationship for 3 years. And they're hoping that Sonia can immigrate to Canada to be with Vlad after she graduates from school. When we're looking at the requirements of... Remember that as a very, very general requirement, the sponsor must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, which we can see that Vlad is, and 18 years of age. There's no mention of him being any younger. Has to reside in Canada, which we can see is also the case. Now we also need to look at this through the context of a restricted relationship. So there's no mention of anybody being under 18 or it being an immigration scam or Vlad being or having the sponsorship bar on him from sponsoring someone else. There's no mention of him ever sponsoring anyone else. There's no mention, they're not married, of course. There's no mention of any type of illegality if they get married. The remote marriage ceremony, of course, doesn't really play a role in this one here. Neither does him leaving her off the application because when he originally got his permanent residency, she, of course, wasn't a member of his family. She still isn't. So we know that C is the correct answer because when we go back to conjugal partners and whether or not there is a fiancé visa or something like that, it doesn't exist. Remember that with conjugal partners, they'd either have to get married or live together as common law and then qualify for permanent residency. So if you got C as the correct answer, perfect. This question tested you on your knowledge of the difference between common law partners, spouses, and conjugal partners, and it also tested you on whether or not you can see these differences through the context of a question. So, good for you if you got this one correct. And a very big thank you for tuning in. It's such a pleasure talking to you and making sure that you're really preparing for the full skills exam correctly. All right, have a really great day and be sure to stay tuned for more sample questions.